My name is Dr. Ezra Blackwood, and I'm a heart surgeon. I've been fixing people's hearts for over 20 years. But on October 17th, 2023, something happened that changed my life forever. I died and came back to life. Now, I have proof that heaven is real. It was a Tuesday, and it wasn't like any other day. The weather was strange. The sky was a mix of orange and purple, like someone had painted it. I remember thinking it looked beautiful but scary at the same time. I woke up early, as usual, to get ready for work. My wife, Sophia, was still asleep. I kissed her cheek softly and went downstairs to make coffee. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I looked out the window. The trees in our backyard were moving in a weird way. It was like they were dancing, but there was no wind. I shook my head and thought I was just tired. I had a big surgery planned for that day. I was going to fix the heart of a young boy named Timothy. He was only 12 years old and had been born with a hole in his heart. I had done this surgery many times before, but for some reason I felt nervous. I got dressed in my blue scrubs and white coat. I put on my lucky socks, the ones with little hearts on them that Sophia had given me for my 50th birthday. I needed all the luck I could get that day. As I drove to the hospital, the radio started playing static. I tried to change the station, but all I could hear was a strange, high-pitched sound. It made my ears hurt, so I turned it off. The streets were almost empty, which was weird for a Tuesday morning. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When I got to the hospital, everything seemed normal at first. The nurses were bustling around, getting ready for the day. My friend and fellow surgeon, Dr. Zol, Amelia Chen, waved at me as she walked by. But then I noticed something odd. The clocks on the wall were all showing different times. Some were going backward, and some were spinning too fast. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I must be seeing things. But when I looked again, the clocks were still acting strange. I decided to ignore it and focus on my job. I had a young boy's life in my hands, after all. I went to see Timothy before the surgery. He was lying in his bed, looking small and scared. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez, were sitting next to him, holding his hands. I smiled at them and tried to sound confident. "Good morning, Timothy," I said. "Are you ready to get that heart of yours fixed up?" Timothy nodded bravely, but I could see he was terrified. I patted his shoulder gently. "Don't worry," I told him. "I've done this many times before. You'll be playing soccer with your friends before you know it." His parents thanked me with tears in their eyes. I felt the weight of their trust on my shoulders. I promised myself I would do everything I could to save their son. As I walked to the operating room, I felt a strange tingling in my left arm. I flexed my fingers, trying to shake it off. I thought it was just nerves, but looking back now, I realize it was a warning sign. The operating room was cold and bright, just like always. The nurses helped me put on my gown, gloves, and mask. Everything was ready. Timothy was wheeled in, already asleep from the anesthesia. I took a deep breath and picked up my scalpel. I made the first cut, and that's when things started to go wrong. The lights in the room began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just a problem with the electricity, but then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shadows were moving on the walls, even though nobody was moving. I tried to focus on the surgery, but my hands were shaking. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to get louder and louder. I could feel sweat running down my back. Something was very wrong. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my chest. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I gasped and dropped my scalpel. The room started to spin around me. I heard Dr. Chen's voice, sounding far away and scared. "Ezra, what's wrong? Someone help him." I tried to speak, but no words came out. My legs gave way, and I felt myself falling. The last thing I saw was the bright light above the operating table. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. It could have been seconds, or it could have been hours. But when I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the operating room anymore. I was floating in a vast, empty space. It was dark, but not scary. I felt calm and peaceful. Then I saw a tiny pinprick of light in the distance. It started to grow bigger and brighter. I felt myself being pulled towards it. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just light. It was a doorway, and beyond it was the most beautiful garden I had ever seen. The colors in this garden were more vivid than anything I had ever seen on Earth. The grass was a green so bright it almost hurt to look at. The flowers were every color of the rainbow, and some colors I had never seen before. The air sparkled like it was filled with tiny diamonds. As I floated through the doorway, I felt a wave of love wash over me. It was so strong it almost knocked me over. I realized I wasn't alone. There were people all around me, smiling and welcoming me. They were wearing white robes that seemed to glow from within. One of them stepped forward. It was an old man with kind eyes and a long white beard. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. He smiled at me and spoke in a voice that sounded like music. "Welcome, Ezra," he said. "We've been waiting for you." I was confused. "Am I dead?" I asked. The old man chuckled. "Not quite," he said. "You're in between. This is just a visit." I looked around, amazed. "Is this heaven?" The old man nodded. "This is just a small part of it. There's so much more to see." He held out his hand to me. "Come," he said. "Let me show you around." As we walked through the garden, I saw incredible things. There were trees with leaves made of gold and silver. Streams of crystal clear water flowed everywhere, and the water sang as it moved. Animals I had never seen before played together peacefully. We came to a big building made of what looked like glass, but when I touched it, it felt warm and alive. The old man led me inside. It was a huge library with books stretching as far as I could see. "This is the Hall of Knowledge," the old man explained. "Every book ever written is here, and many that haven't been written yet." I walked along the shelves, running my fingers over the spines of the books. I could feel the knowledge humming inside them. It was amazing. As I glanced at an open book on a nearby table, I saw a string of numbers that seemed to glow. They stuck in my mind, even though I didn't know why they were important. Next, we went to a place that looked like a giant movie theater. But instead of a screen, there was a huge window looking out onto the earth. "This is where we watch over the living," the old man said. "We can see everything that happens on earth from here." I looked through the window and gasped. I could see my own body lying on the floor of the operating room. Doctors and nurses were rushing around, trying to save me. I saw Dr. Chen doing chest compressions on me. Then I noticed something strange. A young boy playing with a stuffed bear in the corner of the room. It was Timothy, but he looked happy and healthy. "Don't worry," the old man said, seeing my concern. "It's not your time yet. You'll go back soon." We continued our tour. We visited a place where music filled the air, more beautiful than any symphony I had ever heard on earth. We saw gardens of healing where people's spirits were made whole again. Throughout it all, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and love. It was like being wrapped in a warm blanket of pure joy. I never wanted to leave. But as we walked, I started to feel a pulling sensation. It was like something was tugging at me, trying to pull me back. The old man noticed and smiled sadly. "It's time for you to go back, Ezra," he said. "You still have work to do on Earth." I felt tears in my eyes. "But I don't want to go," I said. "It's so beautiful here." The old man put his hand on my shoulder. "I know," he said, "but remember, this isn't goodbye forever. It's just see you later. And now you have a message to share with the world." I nodded, understanding. "I'll tell them," I promised. "I'll tell them that heaven is real." The old man smiled. "That's good," he said. "But more importantly, tell them about the love you felt here. Tell them that no matter what happens in life, they are loved more than they can imagine." I felt the pulling sensation get stronger. The beautiful garden started to fade away. The last thing I saw was the old man waving goodbye. Then everything went dark again. I opened my eyes with a gasp. I was back in the operating room, lying on the cold floor. Dr. Chen was leaning over me, her face pale with worry. "Ezra," she cried, "you're back. We thought we'd lost you." I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy. "How long was I out?" I asked. "Almost 10 minutes, Dr. Chen said. Your heart stopped. We've been doing CPR this whole time." I looked around the room. The other doctors and nurses were staring at me in shock. Timothy was still on the operating table, his surgery unfinished. "Timothy," I said, trying to get up, "I need to finish the surgery." Dr. Chen pushed me back down gently. "No way," she said. "You just died and came back to life. You're not operating on anyone right now." As they wheeled me out of the operating room on a gurney, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The colors, the music, the love, it was all so vivid in my mind. I knew I had to tell people about it. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, I told my story to anyone who would listen. Some people believed me, and some didn't. But I didn't care. I knew what I had experienced was real. As I recovered, strange things started happening, things that couldn't be explained by medical science alone. First, there was the mystery of the broken clock. In the operating room where I had my heart attack, there was a large clock on the wall. When I died, it had stopped working. The hands were frozen at 10:18, the exact time my heart had stopped. No one had touched it, but when I woke up and my heart started beating again, the clock suddenly began ticking. The maintenance staff checked it out and found nothing wrong with it. Then there was the case of Timothy's stuffed bear. While I was dead, I had seen Timothy in that heavenly garden. He was playing with a stuffed bear I had never seen before. When I mentioned this to his parents, they looked shocked. They told me they had bought that exact bear for Timothy just that morning as a good luck charm for his surgery. There was no way I could have known about it. But the most amazing proof came from something I saw in the heavenly library. Those numbers I had seen in the open book, they were still clear in my mind. On a whim, I decided to play them in the lottery. To everyone's amazement, those numbers won the jackpot the very next week. Sophia stayed by my side the whole time, holding my hand and listening to my stories with wide eyes. "I always knew there was more out there," she said. "I'm so glad you got to see it." Dr. Chen came to visit me too. She told me that they had found a blockage in one of my arteries that had caused my heart attack. "It's a miracle you survived," she said. "You were clinically dead for several minutes." I smiled at her. "It wasn't just luck," I said. "I had help from the other side." Dr. Chen was skeptical at first, but even she couldn't deny the evidence. "I can't explain it, Ezra," she said. "By all medical understanding, you were dead. Your brain shouldn't have been able to form new memories. And yet, you've come back with information you couldn't possibly have known." As news of my experience spread, researchers from the university came to interview me. They were particularly interested in the verifiable details I had brought back. Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a neurologist, conducted several tests on me. "Your brain scans are fascinating, Dr. Blackwood," she told me. "They show patterns of activity that we typically only see in deep meditation or under the influence of certain substances. But you're producing these patterns naturally ever since your NDE." As I got better, I started to think about how I could share my experience with more people. I decided to write a book about what had happened to me. I called it A Surgeon's Journey to Heaven and Back. In the book, I described everything I had seen and felt during my near-death experience. I talked about the garden, the library, the music, and the overwhelming feeling of love. I explained how it had changed my view of life and death. The book became a bestseller. People from all over the world wrote to me, telling me how my story had given them hope and comfort. Some of them had lost loved ones and were happy to know that there was a beautiful place waiting for them. I went back to work as a surgeon, but things were different now. I wasn't afraid of death anymore. I knew it wasn't the end, just a new beginning. This made me a better doctor. I could comfort my patients and their families in a way I never could before. Timothy's surgery was completed successfully by another surgeon while I was recovering. When he was well enough, he came to visit me in my office. He looked healthy and happy. "Dr. Blackwood," he said shyly, "I heard about what happened to you during my surgery. Is it true that you saw heaven?" I smiled at him. "Yes, Timothy," I said, "and let me tell you, it's more wonderful than you can imagine." His eyes lit up. "So we don't have to be scared of dying?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, we don't," I said. "But that doesn't mean we should be in a hurry to get there. We still have important work to do here on Earth." As Timothy left my office, I thought about how much my life had changed. I had always been a man of science, believing only in what I could see and touch. But now I knew there was so much more to the world than what we can see with our eyes. My experience had given me a new purpose in life. Yes, I was still a surgeon, fixing people's hearts, but now I was also helping to heal people's souls, giving them hope and peace in the face of death. The evidence I brought back has sparked intense debate in the scientific community. Some researchers argue that it's proof of an afterlife, while others search for scientific explanations. As for me, I know what I experienced. The verifiable details I returned with, the clock, Timothy's bear, the lottery numbers, and my changed brain patterns, are just the tip of the iceberg. The real proof is in the profound change I feel in my heart and soul every day since my journey to the other side. Every night before I go to bed, I think about that beautiful garden and the overwhelming love I felt there. And every morning when I wake up, I'm grateful for another day to share my story and spread that love in the world. I know that one day I'll go back to that garden for good. But until then, I have work to do here. And when it is finally time for me to leave this world, I won't be afraid. I'll be going home.